Have you ever wondered why a collection of ancient poems has survived for thousands of years and continues to shape billions of lives today? I'm talking about the Book of Psalms, and what I'm about to reveal will completely change how you see these sacred texts forever. Most people think the Psalms are just old religious songs gathering dust in forgotten corners of libraries. But here's what they don't tell you. These 150 compositions contain the most sophisticated emotional intelligence system ever created by humanity. We're talking about a psychological masterpiece that predates modern therapy by millennia, yet it addresses every single human emotion with surgical precision. My name is David, and I've spent the last 7 years dissecting every single psalm, analyzing their structure, their language patterns, and their incredible ability to speak directly to the human soul. What I discovered shocked me. These aren't just poems. They're emotional blueprints that have been secretly guiding human consciousness for over 3,000 years. In this video series, I'm going to take you on a journey through the most misunderstood book in human history. By the end, you'll understand why presidents quote them in crisis, why therapists recommend them to patients, and why even atheists find themselves drawn to their raw honesty about the human condition. But first, let me show you exactly what makes the Psalms so incredibly powerful. Picture this. You're having the worst day of your life. Everything that could go wrong has gone wrong. Your relationships are falling apart, your career is crumbling, and you feel completely abandoned by everyone you trusted. Now imagine opening a book and finding someone who lived 3,000 years ago, describing your exact feelings with such precision that it's like they're reading your mind. That's the power of the Psalms. But here's where it gets really interesting. The Psalms don't just validate your pain, they provide a roadmap through it. Each psalm follows a specific emotional journey that mirrors the natural progression of human healing. And this isn't an accident. The ancient poets who crafted these texts understood something about the human psyche that we're only now beginning to rediscover through modern neuroscience. Let me give you a quick example. Psalm 23, probably the most famous psalm in existence, isn't just about sheep and shepherds. It's actually a masterclass in anxiety management. The entire structure of the psalm rewires your brain's stress response through a series of carefully crafted mental images. When you read, "The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want," your nervous system literally begins to calm down. Scientists have actually measured this effect using brain scans, and that's just one psalm out of 150. Each one targets different emotional states with laser-like precision. There's a psalm for when you're angry, one for when you're grateful, one for when you feel betrayed, one for when you're celebrating. It's like having a personal emotional coach who's been studying human nature for 3 millennia. But wait, there's more. The Psalms aren't just individual emotional tools. They're arranged in a specific sequence that tells a larger story about the human journey, from despair to hope, from chaos to peace, from isolation to connection. The entire book is structured like a massive therapy session that spans generations. Now, I know what you're thinking. This sounds too good to be true. How can ancient texts possibly be relevant to modern life? Well, here's the thing that blew my mind when I first discovered it. Human emotions haven't changed in 3,000 years. We still feel the same fear, anger, joy, and sadness that people felt in ancient times. The circumstances might be different, but the internal experience is identical. And the poets who wrote the Psalms understood this better than anyone. They weren't just recording their personal experiences, they were creating universal templates for emotional processing. Every psalm follows specific patterns that align with how our brains naturally process difficult experiences. Take Psalm 13, for example. It starts with raw complaint. "How long, Lord? Will you forget me forever?" Then it moves through questioning, bargaining, and eventually arrives at resolution. but I trust in your unfailing love. This is the exact same progression that grief counselors teach their clients today. The ancient psalmists figured out the optimal path through emotional trauma thousands of years before we had the scientific language to explain why it works. But here's what makes the Psalms truly revolutionary. They don't just help you process negative emotions, they actually transform them into sources of strength. The Hebrew word for praise that appears throughout the Psalms literally means to shine or to boast. The psalmists discovered that by fully acknowledging their pain and then consciously shifting their focus to sources of hope, they could literally transform their neural pathways. Modern psychology calls this post-traumatic growth, but the Psalms have been facilitating this process for millennia. They provide a safe space to express your darkest thoughts and feelings, then guide you toward a perspective that transforms those experiences into wisdom and resilience. And this brings us to perhaps the most incredible aspect of the Psalms, their brutal honesty. These aren't sanitized, feel-good, inspirational quotes. They're raw, unfiltered expressions of human experience in all its messy complexity. You'll find Psalms where the writers are literally cursing their enemies, questioning God's justice, and expressing thoughts that would make modern readers uncomfortable. But that's exactly why they work so well. They give you permission to feel everything you're actually feeling instead of pretending to be okay when you're not. They validate the full spectrum of human emotion, including the parts we're usually told to suppress or ignore. Psalm 88, for instance, is one of the darkest pieces of literature ever written. It ends with the word darkness and offers no resolution, no happy ending, no silver lining, just raw acknowledgement of profound suffering. And yet, paradoxically, this psalm has brought comfort to millions of people because it validates their experience of depression and despair without trying to fix it or minimize it. This is emotional intelligence at its highest level. The Psalms teach us that healing doesn't always mean feeling better. Sometimes it means feeling everything more fully, more honestly, more courageously. They show us that there's profound strength in vulnerability and incredible power in authentic expression. Now, you might be wondering about the religious aspect of the Psalms. Do you need to be religious to benefit from them? Absolutely not. While the Psalms emerged from a specific spiritual tradition, their psychological insights transcend any particular belief system. You can appreciate their wisdom whether you're deeply religious, spiritually curious, or completely secular. Think of them like Shakespeare's plays. You don't need to believe in the specific stories to be moved by the universal truths about human nature they contain. The Psalms work the same way. They're repositories of human wisdom that speak to anyone willing to engage with them honestly. But here's where things get really fascinating. The Psalms aren't just individual poems. They're part of a carefully curated collection that was assembled over centuries. The order matters. The groupings matter. The progression from beginning to end tells a story about the entire human journey. The first psalm presents a choice between two paths, the way of the righteous and the way of the wicked. This isn't moral judgment, it's psychological observation. One path leads to flourishing, the other to destruction. The rest of the Psalms explore what it means to choose the path of flourishing, even when everything in your life seems to be falling apart. The final psalm, Psalm 150, is pure celebration. It's an explosion of joy and gratitude that encompasses every instrument, every voice, every living thing. This is where the emotional journey of the Psalms ultimately leads, to a place of wholehearted engagement with life in all its complexity. But getting from Psalm 1 to Psalm 150 isn't a straight line. It's a spiral journey that takes you through every possible human emotion and experience. You'll encounter psalms of complaint, confession, thanksgiving, wisdom, and worship. You'll meet kings and commoners, warriors and poets, people at their highest highs and lowest lows. And here's the beautiful thing. No matter where you are in your own life journey, there's a psalm that meets you exactly where you are. Feeling abandoned? Psalm 22 has your back. Experiencing gratitude? Psalm 103 will amplify that feeling. Struggling with guilt? Psalm 51 provides a roadmap to forgiveness and renewal. The Psalms are like a master key that unlocks every door in the house of human emotion. They don't just validate your feelings, they transform them. They don't just comfort you in your pain, they show you how to extract meaning and purpose from your suffering. And this transformation isn't just metaphorical. Recent neuroscience research has shown that engaging with the Psalms literally rewires your brain. When you read these ancient texts with genuine attention, specific neural pathways associated with emotional regulation become more active. Your prefrontal cortex, the part of your brain responsible for executive function and emotional control, becomes more engaged. It's like going to the gym for your emotional intelligence. But here's what most people miss entirely. The Psalms aren't meant to be read casually. They're designed to be experienced, absorbed, wrestled with. Each psalm is like a piece of music that needs to be played, not just looked at on a page. The Hebrew poets who crafted these texts understood that transformation happens through repetition, through allowing these words to sink deep into your consciousness. Think about how a song can instantly transport you back to a specific moment in your life. The Psalms work the same way, but in reverse. Instead of taking you back to old emotions, they create new emotional pathways. They literally teach your brain new ways to process experience. Take Psalm 42, which begins with one of the most beautiful metaphors in all literature. As the deer pants for streams of water, so my soul pants for you, my God. This isn't just pretty poetry, it's a neurological hack. When you visualize a deer desperately seeking water, your brain creates a powerful association between spiritual longing and basic survival needs. This imagery bypasses your rational mind and speaks directly to your emotional core, and the psalmist doesn't stop there. The entire psalm is structured around the rhythm of breathing, of panting, of the desperate search for what you need to survive. By the time you finish reading it, your own breathing has probably synchronized with the rhythm of the text. You've literally been guided into a meditative state without even realizing it. This is the genius of these ancient poets. They understood that the human mind learns through pattern, through rhythm, through repetition. Every psalm is carefully crafted to create specific psychological states. They're not just describing emotions, they're inducing them, shaping them, transforming them. But here's where the psalms get really sophisticated. They don't just work on individual emotions, they address the entire ecosystem of human consciousness. They recognize that anger is often masked hurt, that depression frequently contains buried rage, that joy can coexist with sorrow. They show you how to hold multiple contradictory feelings simultaneously without being torn apart by them. Psalm 30 perfectly captures this complexity. It starts with celebration. I will exalt you, Lord, for you lifted me out of the depths. But then it immediately acknowledges the journey that led to this moment. You turned my wailing into dancing. You removed my sackcloth and clothed me with joy. The psalm doesn't pretend that suffering never happened. Instead, it shows how pain can be transformed into wisdom, how weeping can become the foundation for authentic joy. This is emotional maturity at its highest level. The Psalms teach you that healing doesn't mean forgetting your pain or pretending it never happened. True healing means integrating your difficult experiences into a larger narrative of growth and meaning. They show you how to honor your wounds while refusing to let them define your entire story. And the beauty is that this process is completely individualized. Two people can read the same psalm and have completely different experiences because each person brings their own history, their own wounds, their own hopes to the text. The Psalms are like mirrors that reflect back exactly what you need to see at any given moment. I remember the first time I really understood this. I was going through a particularly difficult period in my life. Everything I had worked for seemed to be crumbling. I felt betrayed by people I trusted, overwhelmed by circumstances beyond my control. I was angry, hurt, and honestly questioning whether any of my efforts mattered. Then I encountered Psalm 73. It starts with what should be a statement of faith. Surely God is good to Israel, to those who are pure in heart. But the very next verse reveals the psalmist's true struggle. But as for me, my feet had almost slipped. I had nearly lost my foothold. The writer then goes on to describe exactly what I was feeling. Confusion about why bad things happen to good people, frustration with apparent injustice, the temptation to give up on doing the right thing when it seems like the wrong people are winning. But here's what blew my mind. The psalm doesn't resolve these questions with easy answers or superficial comfort. Instead, it takes the writer and the reader through a process of perspective shift. The turning point comes when the psalmist enters the sanctuary, the place of deeper understanding. Suddenly, the temporary nature of injustice becomes clear. The bigger picture emerges. Hope is restored not through denial of reality, but through a deeper understanding of it. Reading that psalm didn't magically solve my problems, but it did something more powerful. It showed me that my struggle was part of a larger human story, that others had walked this path before me and found their way through. It gave me a framework for processing my pain that transformed it from meaningless suffering into meaningful growth. This is what the Psalms do. They don't provide easy answers, they provide better questions. They don't eliminate struggle, they show you how to struggle well. They teach you that there's a difference between pain and suffering. Pain is inevitable, but suffering is optional. The Psalms show you how to experience pain without being destroyed by it. And this brings us to one of the most misunderstood aspects of these ancient texts. People often think of them as escapist literature, as comforting words for people who can't handle reality. But the truth is exactly the opposite. The Psalms are among the most realistic, hard-hitting examinations of human experience ever written. They don't shy away from life's difficulties. They dive straight into them. Psalm 57 captures this perfectly. David is literally hiding in a cave, running for his life from people who want to kill him. And what does he do? He writes poetry, but not escapist fantasy. He writes with brutal honesty about his circumstances. I am in the midst of lions. I am forced to dwell among ravenous beasts. He doesn't pretend everything is fine. He acknowledges the very real danger he's facing. But then something remarkable happens. In the middle of describing his dire circumstances, he makes a choice. He chooses to focus not just on his problems, but on sources of hope. My heart, O God, is steadfast. My heart is steadfast. I will sing and make music. This isn't positive thinking or denial. This is conscious choice in the face of genuine hardship. This is perhaps the most practical lesson the Psalms teach. You always have a choice about where to direct your attention. You can't always control your circumstances, but you can always choose your response. The Psalms show you how to make that choice consciously, deliberately, courageously. And here's what makes this even more powerful. The Psalms show you that this choice isn't a one-time decision. It's something you have to make over and over again, sometimes moment by moment. The psalmists understood that emotional and spiritual health isn't a destination you arrive at. It's a practice you engage in daily. This daily practice aspect of the Psalms is something that completely escaped me for years. I used to think that reading them once or twice would somehow magically transform my life, but that's like expecting to get physically fit by going to the gym once. The real power of the Psalms emerges through consistent engagement, through allowing these ancient patterns to gradually reshape your mental habits. Think about how professional athletes train. They don't just practice when they feel like it or when they're already performing well. They practice especially when things are difficult, when their technique is off, when they're struggling. The Psalms work the same way. They're most powerful when you engage with them during your darkest moments, when everything inside you wants to give up. Psalm 63 demonstrates this beautifully. David writes it while he's in the wilderness of Judah, literally dying of thirst. His physical circumstances mirror his emotional state perfectly, but instead of just complaining about his situation, he uses it as a metaphor for deeper longing. You, God, are my God. Earnestly I seek you. I thirst for you. My whole being longs for you. In a dry and parched land where there is no water. Notice what's happening here. David isn't denying his physical discomfort or pretending everything is fine. He's using his immediate experience as a gateway to understand something deeper about human nature. He's discovering that physical thirst can teach us about emotional and spiritual thirst. This is genius-level emotional intelligence disguised as simple poetry. But here's where the psalm gets really sophisticated. David doesn't just acknowledge his thirst, he transforms it into anticipation. He begins to imagine what satisfaction will feel like. I will be satisfied as with the richest of foods. With singing lips, my mouth will praise you. He's literally rewiring his brain's expectation patterns. Instead of focusing on what he lacks, he's training his mind to anticipate fulfillment. This isn't wishful thinking or toxic positivity. This is strategic mental conditioning. David understands that what you focus on expands. If you constantly focus on what's missing from your life, you'll experience more lack. But if you can train your mind to anticipate good things, you literally increase the probability of experiencing them. Modern psychology calls this phenomenon attentional bias. Your brain is constantly filtering reality based on what you've trained it to notice. If you're always looking for problems, you'll find them everywhere. But if you train your attention to notice possibilities and sources of hope, you'll start seeing opportunities that were always there, but invisible to your untrained eye. The Psalms are essentially an ancient training manual for optimizing your attentional bias. They teach you how to notice beauty in the midst of chaos, hope in the depths of despair, meaning in the face of apparent meaninglessness. Take Psalm 104, which is basically a masterclass in attention training. The entire psalm is an extended meditation on the natural world, but it's not just nature appreciation, it's a systematic retraining of perception. The psalmist looks at clouds and sees God's chariot. He observes wind and sees divine messengers. He watches animals and sees a perfectly orchestrated ecosystem of care and provision. By the time you finish reading this psalm, your own perception has been subtly altered. You start noticing details in the natural world that you previously overlooked. You begin to see patterns and connections that were always there but had become invisible through habituation. This is the Psalms, working on your consciousness at the deepest level. But here's what makes this even more remarkable. The psalmists weren't writing for people living comfortable lives in peaceful times. They were writing for people facing war, exile, betrayal, disease, and death. These weren't theoretical exercises in positive thinking. They were practical survival tools for people whose lives hung in the balance. Psalm 137 captures this tension perfectly. It's one of the most heartbreaking pieces of literature ever written. The Israelites are in exile, forced to live in a foreign land after their homeland has been destroyed. They're traumatized, displaced, and hopeless. The psalm begins with raw grief. By the rivers of Babylon, we sat and wept when we remembered Zion. But then, something extraordinary happens. Even in the depths of their despair, they make a choice. They refuse to let their captors turn their sacred songs into entertainment. They hang up their harps and declare that they won't sing the Lord's song in a foreign land. This isn't just religious devotion. This is psychological resistance at the highest level. The exiles understand something profound about the relationship between memory and identity. They know that if they allow their most sacred experiences to be trivialized or commercialized, they'll lose something essential about who they are. So they choose silence over degradation. They choose to preserve the integrity of their inner life, even when they've lost control of their external circumstances. This is one of the most sophisticated psychological insights in all of ancient literature. The psalmist understands that sometimes the most powerful response to trauma isn't trying to feel better immediately. Sometimes it's protecting the sacred spaces in your mind and heart until you're in a context where healing can actually occur. But the psalm doesn't end with noble silence. It ends with some of the most disturbing language in the entire Bible, expressing violent fantasies about revenge against their captors. Modern readers are often shocked by this sudden shift, but it reveals something crucial about the psalm's approach to emotional healing. The ancient poets understood that suppressed rage doesn't just disappear. It either gets projected onto innocent people, or it turns inward and becomes depression. So they created safe spaces for expressing even the most socially unacceptable emotions. They gave people permission to feel their fury fully, to acknowledge their desire for revenge, to express their darkest thoughts without acting on them. This is therapeutic genius. By providing an outlet for toxic emotions, the Psalms prevent them from poisoning the rest of your psychological system. They teach you that having dark thoughts doesn't make you a bad person. It makes you human. The key is learning to express these thoughts in ways that don't harm yourself or others. And this brings us to one of the most revolutionary aspects of the Psalms. They completely redefine what it means to be spiritual or emotionally mature. Instead of demanding that you always feel positive emotions or maintain perfect composure, they show you that true maturity means being able to feel everything without being controlled by anything. Psalm 77 demonstrates this beautifully. The writer is clearly going through a crisis of faith. He's questioning everything he once believed. Will the Lord reject forever? Will he never show his favor again? Has his unfailing love vanished forever? Has his promise failed for all time? Has God forgotten to be merciful? Has he in anger withheld his compassion? These aren't the questions of someone with weak faith. These are the questions of someone whose faith is being refined through fire. The psalmist doesn't pretend to have easy answers. Instead, he does something much more profound. He remembers. He deliberately recalls times when he experienced divine intervention. I will remember the deeds of the Lord. Yes, I will remember your miracles of long ago. This is strategic memory work. The psalmist understands that during crisis, your brain naturally focuses on negative experiences and forgets positive ones. This isn't a character flaw, it's a survival mechanism. Your brain is designed to remember threats more vividly than blessings, because forgetting a threat could be fatal. But this natural tendency can trap you in cycles of despair if you don't consciously counteract it. The Psalms teach you how to deliberately curate your memory, how to give equal weight to positive experiences, how to build a more balanced internal narrative about your life. This isn't about denying negative experiences or pretending problems don't exist. It's about refusing to let negative experiences become the only story you tell yourself about reality. It's about maintaining perspective even when your current circumstances are overwhelming. And here's what makes this approach so powerful. It's based on the understanding that your current crisis is temporary, but the patterns you develop for handling crisis will shape the rest of your life. The Psalms aren't just helping you get through today's problems, they're training you to handle whatever challenges come next. Psalm 90 captures this long-term perspective perfectly. It starts by acknowledging the brevity and difficulty of human life. Our days may come to 70 years, or 80, if our strength endures. Yet the best of them are but trouble and sorrow, for they quickly pass, and we fly away. This isn't pessimism, it's realism. Life is short and often difficult. But instead of using this reality as an excuse for despair, the psalmist uses it as motivation for wisdom. Teach us to number our days, that we may gain a heart of wisdom. The limited nature of life isn't a reason to give up. It's a reason to live more intentionally, more courageously, more lovingly. This perspective transforms everything. When you truly understand that your time is limited, you stop wasting energy on petty grievances. You stop postponing important conversations. You stop waiting for perfect conditions to pursue your dreams. You realize that the only moment you actually have is this one, and you start treating it with the reverence it deserves. The Psalms teach you that wisdom isn't about having all the answers. Wisdom is about asking better questions, making conscious choices, and learning to find meaning even in difficult circumstances. They show you that you don't need to understand everything about your life to live it well. You just need to engage with it honestly, courageously, and compassionately. And this honest engagement is what makes the Psalms so incredibly relevant to modern life. We live in an age of unprecedented complexity, where traditional sources of meaning and stability are constantly being challenged. People are struggling with anxiety, depression, and existential confusion at levels never before seen in human history. But the Psalms speak directly to these contemporary struggles because they address the timeless aspects of human experience. They show you that feeling overwhelmed isn't a modern phenomenon. People have always struggled with uncertainty, injustice, loss, and the search for meaning. What's different now isn't the nature of human suffering. It's our tools for processing it. The Psalms provide those tools. They offer time-tested strategies for navigating life's inevitable difficulties. They show you how to transform pain into wisdom, how to find hope in the midst of despair, how to maintain your humanity even when everything around you seems to be falling apart. But here's the key. These tools only work if you actually use them. The Psalms aren't magic spells that automatically fix your problems. They're training manuals that require consistent practice and application. They work through repetition, through gradual internalization, through allowing these ancient wisdom patterns to slowly reshape your default responses to life's challenges. Think of it like learning to play a musical instrument. You don't become proficient by reading about music theory or watching other people play. You have to practice scales, work through exercises, make mistakes, and gradually develop muscle memory. The Psalms work the same way for your emotional and spiritual development. Each psalm is like a different musical exercise, designed to strengthen specific aspects of your inner life. Some focus on gratitude, others on processing anger or grief. Some help you develop patience, others teach you how to celebrate. Together, they provide a comprehensive curriculum for human flourishing. And just like musical training, the benefits compound over time. The more you engage with these texts, the more natural it becomes to apply their insights in real-life situations. Eventually, the wisdom of the Psalms becomes integrated into your automatic responses. You find yourself naturally looking for sources of hope during difficult times, instinctively expressing gratitude for good experiences, spontaneously offering compassion to people who are struggling. This is the ultimate goal of the Psalms. Not just to comfort you during crisis, but to transform you into the kind of person who can handle whatever life brings with grace, wisdom, and resilience. They're designed to develop what ancient philosophers called virtue and what modern psychologists call emotional intelligence. But achieving this transformation requires something that our instant gratification culture struggles with: patience. The Psalms work slowly, gradually, almost imperceptibly. You might read a psalm today and feel like nothing happened. But weeks or months later, you'll find yourself responding to a difficult situation with wisdom you didn't know you possessed. The seeds planted by your engagement with these texts will suddenly bloom in moments when you need them most. This slow-working nature of the Psalms is actually one of their greatest strengths. Quick fixes rarely produce lasting change, but gradual transformation, the kind that happens at the cellular level of your consciousness, creates permanent shifts in how you experience and respond to life. And this brings us to something absolutely fascinating that most people completely miss about the Psalms. They're not just individual pieces of wisdom scattered randomly throughout a book. They're actually arranged in a sophisticated psychological progression that mirrors the natural stages of human development and spiritual maturity. The early Psalms tend to focus on external circumstances, on what's happening to you in the world around you. But as you move through the collection, there's a gradual shift toward internal transformation, toward what's happening within you, regardless of external conditions. This isn't an accident. The ancient compilers understood something profound about how consciousness evolves over time. Think about your own life journey. When you were younger, your happiness probably depended heavily on external validation, on achieving certain goals, on having the right relationships or possessions. But as you've matured, you've likely discovered that true contentment comes from internal sources that remain stable regardless of changing circumstances. The Psalms map this exact journey. They start with Psalms about victory in battle, about defeating enemies, about external vindication, but they gradually evolve towards Psalms about inner peace, about finding joy in simple existence, about celebrating the fundamental goodness of being alive. The final Psalms are pure expressions of gratitude and wonder that seem to emerge from nowhere and everywhere at once. This progression teaches you something crucial about emotional and spiritual development. You can't skip stages. You can't jump straight to enlightened acceptance without first working through your anger, your grief, your sense of injustice. The Psalms show you that maturity isn't about transcending difficult emotions. It's about integrating them into a larger understanding of what it means to be human. Psalm 39 perfectly captures this integration process. The writer starts by trying to control his emotional expression. I said, I will watch my ways and keep my tongue from sin. I will put a muzzle on my mouth while in the presence of the wicked. He's attempting to maintain perfect composure, to never let his struggles show. But this forced composure backfires spectacularly. But when I was silent and still, not even saying anything good, my anguish increased. My heart grew hot within me. While I meditated, the fire burned. Then I spoke with my tongue. The suppressed emotions don't disappear. They intensify until they become impossible to contain. This is such a perfect description of what happens when we try to bypass difficult emotions instead of processing them. The psalmist discovers what modern psychology has confirmed. Suppressed emotions don't go away. They go underground where they cause even more problems. The only sustainable approach is to feel them fully and express them appropriately. But here's where the psalm gets really sophisticated. Instead of just venting his emotions randomly, the writer channels them into a deeper inquiry about the nature of human existence. Show me, Lord, my life's end and the number of my days. Let me know how fleeting my life is. His emotional crisis becomes a doorway to philosophical reflection. This is the genius of the Psalms in action. They don't just validate your feelings, they transform them into opportunities for growth and understanding. They show you how to use your pain as a teacher, your confusion as a compass, your struggles as stepping stones to wisdom. And this transformational approach is desperately needed in our current cultural moment. We live in a time when people are either encouraged to suppress their negative emotions completely or to express them in destructive ways that harm themselves and others. The Psalms offer a third option. Feel everything, express it safely, and use it as fuel for growth. But achieving this kind of emotional alchemy requires what the ancient poets called the fear of the Lord. Now, before you tune out thinking this is religious jargon, let me explain what this phrase actually means. It's not about being terrified of divine punishment. It's about maintaining a sense of awe and reverence for the mystery and complexity of existence. When you approach life with this kind of reverence, everything changes. Your problems don't disappear, but they take their proper place within a much larger context. You realize that your individual struggles, while completely valid and deserving of attention, are part of a vast tapestry of human experience that spans generations and cultures. This perspective shift is incredibly liberating. It means you're not alone in your suffering. It means your pain isn't evidence that something is fundamentally wrong with you or your life. It means you're participating in the universal human experience of growth through challenge. Psalm 119, the longest psalm in the collection, demonstrates this reverent approach to life's difficulties. The entire psalm is an extended meditation on wisdom, on learning to see life from a perspective that transcends immediate circumstances. The writer faces persecution, confusion, and betrayal. But instead of being consumed by these challenges, he uses them as opportunities to deepen his understanding. What's remarkable about this psalm is its length and repetition. It's not trying to be clever or original. It's deliberately repetitive, almost meditative in its approach. This teaches you something important about how transformation actually occurs. It's not about having brilliant insights or dramatic breakthroughs. It's about returning again and again to fundamental truths until they become part of your cellular structure. Think about how athletes develop muscle memory. They don't practice a movement once and expect to master it. They repeat it thousands of times until their body knows how to perform it automatically, even under pressure. The Psalms work the same way for your emotional and spiritual reflexes. Each time you engage with these texts, you're strengthening neural pathways associated with resilience, gratitude, hope, and wisdom. You're literally rewiring your brain to respond to challenges with greater creativity and less reactivity. But this rewiring happens gradually, through consistent practice, rather than dramatic revelation. And this brings us to one of the most practical aspects of working with the Psalms. They meet you wherever you are in your emotional journey. You don't need to be in a good mood to benefit from them. In fact, they're often most powerful when you're struggling the most. I remember a particularly dark period in my own life when everything seemed to be falling apart simultaneously. I was dealing with health issues, financial stress, relationship problems, and a profound sense that nothing I was doing mattered. I felt completely overwhelmed and honestly questioned whether life was worth the struggle. During this time, I encountered Psalm 42 again, but this time it hit me differently. The opening metaphor about the deer panting for water suddenly made perfect sense. I wasn't just intellectually understanding the imagery, I was living it. I felt that same desperate thirst for something that would restore my sense of purpose and hope. But what transformed my experience wasn't finding immediate answers to my problems. What changed everything was discovering that this ancient poet had felt exactly the same way I was feeling. He had experienced that same desperate thirst, that same sense of being overwhelmed by circumstances beyond his control. And somehow, he had found a way through. The psalm doesn't offer easy solutions or quick fixes. Instead, it provides something much more valuable: companionship in the struggle. It shows you that feeling overwhelmed doesn't mean you're weak or faithless or broken. It means you're human. And being human means experiencing the full spectrum of emotions without being destroyed by them. This companionship aspect of the Psalms is something that our increasingly isolated culture desperately needs. We live in a time when people are more connected than ever through technology, yet more lonely than ever in terms of genuine understanding and support. The Psalms bridge this gap by connecting you to a community of struggle and hope that spans thousands of years. When you read Psalm 13 and hear David crying out, "How long, Lord? Will you forget me forever?" You're not just reading ancient poetry. You're joining a conversation that includes everyone who has ever felt abandoned, forgotten, or overwhelmed by life's challenges. You're part of a community of people who have faced darkness and chose to keep seeking light. And this community aspect transforms the individual experience of reading the Psalms into something much larger and more meaningful. You're not just working through your personal issues in isolation. You're participating in humanity's ongoing project of learning how to suffer well, how to find meaning in difficulty, how to maintain hope in the face of apparent hopelessness. But here's what makes this community so powerful. It's not based on shared beliefs or common circumstances. It's based on shared humanity. You don't need to have the same religious background as the psalmists to benefit from their wisdom. You don't need to face identical challenges to learn from their responses. You just need to be willing to engage honestly with the fundamental questions of human existence. And those fundamental questions haven't changed in 3,000 years. How do you maintain hope when everything seems hopeless? How do you find meaning in suffering? How do you love others when you've been hurt by people you trusted? How do you keep going when you don't know what the future holds? The Psalms don't provide simple answers to these questions, because simple answers don't exist. Instead, they show you how to live with the questions courageously, how to find strength in uncertainty, how to discover joy even in the midst of sorrow. Psalm 46 captures this approach perfectly with one of the most famous lines in the entire collection: "Be still and know that I am God." This isn't a command to be passive or resigned. It's an invitation to find a place of inner stability that remains constant regardless of external chaos. The psalm begins by acknowledging that chaos is real. Therefore, we will not fear. Though the earth give way and the mountains fall into the heart of the sea, though its waters roar and foam and the mountains quake with their surging. The writers aren't minimizing the reality of catastrophic change. They're saying that even in the face of complete upheaval, there's a source of stability available to you. But accessing this stability requires something that goes against every instinct you have during crisis: stillness. When everything is falling apart, your natural response is to fight, flee, or frantically try to control the situation. The Psalms teach you that sometimes the most powerful response is to stop, breathe, and reconnect with sources of strength that transcend your immediate circumstances. This doesn't mean becoming passive or resigned. Stillness in this context means finding your center so you can respond to challenges from a place of wisdom rather than reactivity. It means accessing the part of yourself that remains calm and clear, even when everything around you is chaotic. And this ability to find stillness in the storm is perhaps the most practical skill the Psalms can teach you. In our hyper-connected, constantly stimulated world, the capacity for genuine stillness is becoming increasingly rare and increasingly valuable. People who can access inner calm during external chaos have a tremendous advantage in every area of life. But developing this capacity requires practice, and the Psalms provide the perfect training ground. Each psalm is an opportunity to slow down, to move from reactive thinking to reflective thinking, to shift from anxiety to curiosity about what this moment might teach you. Take Psalm 62, which is essentially a masterclass in developing unshakable inner stability. The writer faces opposition from people who are actively trying to destroy his reputation and undermine his position. But instead of getting caught up in reactive anger or defensive strategies, he makes a conscious choice to ground himself in something deeper. Truly, my soul finds rest in God. My salvation comes from him. Truly, he is my rock and my salvation. He is my fortress. I will never be shaken. Notice the repetition of the word truly. The writer is talking himself into a different perspective, deliberately choosing to focus on sources of stability rather than sources of threat. This isn't denial or wishful thinking. It's strategic attention management. The writer acknowledges the reality of his situation, but refuses to let external circumstances determine his internal state. He's demonstrating one of the most sophisticated psychological skills possible: the ability to remain centered regardless of what's happening around you. And this skill is completely learnable. It's not a special gift that some people have and others don't. It's a capacity that every human being possesses, but most people never develop because they've never been taught how. The Psalms are essentially a training manual for developing this capacity. But here's what makes this training so effective. It's not theoretical. The psalmists aren't writing from ivory towers or perfect circumstances. They're writing from the trenches of real life, dealing with real problems, facing real consequences. Their wisdom isn't academic, it's practical. It's been tested under fire and proven to work. This practical, battle-tested quality is what makes the Psalms so trustworthy. You're not getting advice from people who have never faced serious challenges. You're learning from people who have been through hell and found ways not just to survive, but to thrive. They're showing you that it's possible to maintain your humanity, your compassion, and your hope even in the worst circumstances. And perhaps most importantly, they're showing you that transformation is always possible. No matter how stuck you feel, no matter how hopeless your situation appears, no matter how many times you've tried and failed, the possibility for genuine change always exists. The Psalms are full of stories about people who seemed completely defeated but found ways to turn their lives around. Psalm 40 is a perfect example. The writer describes being in the slimy pit and the mud and mire with no way out. This isn't just metaphorical language. He's describing the experience of being completely stuck, of having exhausted all your options, of feeling like you're drowning in circumstances beyond your control. But then something shifts. He lifted me out of the slimy pit, out of the mud and mire. He set my feet on a rock and gave me a firm place to stand. He put a new song in my mouth, a hymn of praise to our God. The transformation isn't just about changing circumstances. It's about finding a completely new way of being in the world. The new song represents a fundamental shift in perspective, a different way of understanding and responding to life. This is what the Psalms ultimately offer. Not just comfort in difficult times, but the possibility of genuine transformation that changes how you experience everything. But achieving this transformation requires something that our quick-fix culture struggles with: patience with the process. Real change doesn't happen overnight. It happens through consistent engagement with practices and perspectives that gradually reshape your consciousness from the inside out. The Psalms teach you to trust this process even when you can't see immediate results. They show you that every moment of honest engagement with life's challenges is contributing to your growth, even when it doesn't feel like it. They help you understand that struggle itself is not the enemy, but rather the raw material from which wisdom and strength are forged. And this understanding completely transforms how you approach difficulties. Instead of seeing problems as obstacles to your happiness, you begin to see them as opportunities for development. Instead of trying to avoid challenges, you learn to meet them with curiosity and courage. Instead of being defeated by setbacks, you discover how to use them as stepping stones to greater resilience and wisdom. This shift in perspective is perhaps the most valuable gift the Psalms can give you. It doesn't eliminate suffering from your life, but it transforms suffering into something meaningful, something that contributes to your growth rather than just causing you pain. And once you understand this, everything changes. You stop being a victim of your circumstances and become an active participant in your own development. You realize that every experience, pleasant or unpleasant, is teaching you something valuable about life, about yourself, about what it means to be human. This is the ultimate wisdom of the Psalms. They show you how to live fully, courageously, and compassionately, regardless of what life brings your way. They teach you that your circumstances don't define you, your responses do, and they provide you with the tools and perspectives necessary to respond to any situation with grace, wisdom, and hope. The final lesson the Psalms teach us is perhaps the most revolutionary of all. They show you that wisdom isn't something you acquire once and then possess forever. It's something you must actively cultivate every single day through conscious choice and deliberate practice. Think about Psalm 121, which begins with a question that cuts straight to the heart of human vulnerability. I lift up my eyes to the mountains. Where does my help come from? This isn't rhetorical. The writer is genuinely asking where to find reliable support in an unreliable world. But here's what's brilliant about this psalm. It doesn't just answer the question once. It keeps reinforcing the answer through repetition, as if the writer knows that in moments of crisis, you need to hear the same truth multiple times before it penetrates your fear-clouded consciousness. He will not let your foot slip. He who watches over you will not slumber. This repetitive structure teaches you something crucial about how transformation actually works in real life. You don't just learn something once and automatically apply it forever. You have to keep reminding yourself of what you know to be true, especially when everything in your circumstances suggests otherwise. The Psalms are essentially teaching you how to become your own inner coach, your own source of encouragement and perspective when external support isn't available. They're showing you how to have conversations with yourself that strengthen rather than weaken your resolve. But here's what makes this self-coaching so powerful. It's not based on empty positive affirmations or wishful thinking. It's grounded in honest assessment of reality, combined with conscious choice about how to respond. The psalmists never pretend that difficulties don't exist. Instead, they acknowledge challenges fully and then deliberately choose to focus on sources of strength and hope. This balance between realism and optimism is what makes the Psalms so psychologically sophisticated. They teach you that you can be honest about problems without being defeated by them, that you can acknowledge pain without being consumed by it, that you can face uncertainty without being paralyzed by fear. And this brings us full circle to where we started. The Book of Psalms has survived for 3,000 years, not because it offers easy answers or comfortable platitudes, but because it provides something much more valuable, a roadmap for navigating the full complexity of human experience with courage, wisdom, and grace. These ancient poets understood something about the human condition that we're still learning today. That meaning isn't found in avoiding difficulties, but in learning how to transform difficulties into opportunities for growth. They discovered that true strength isn't about never falling down, but about developing the capacity to get back up every time you fall. The Psalms don't promise you an easy life. What they promise is something far better. The tools and perspectives necessary to live any life well, regardless of what challenges it brings. They show you that you already possess everything you need to not just survive whatever comes your way, but to thrive in the midst of it. So here's my challenge to you. Don't just watch this video and move on. Take one psalm, any psalm that resonates with where you are right now, and spend the next week really engaging with it. Read it slowly, repeatedly, thoughtfully. Let its words reshape your mental patterns and emotional responses. See if these ancient wisdom traditions can transform your modern life the same way they've been transforming lives for millennia. Because here's what I've discovered after 7 years of studying these texts. The Psalms don't just change how you think about your problems. They change how you think about everything. They don't just comfort you in difficult times. They transform you into someone who can find meaning and purpose regardless of circumstances. The question isn't whether the Psalms work. The question is whether you're willing to do the work necessary to let them transform your life. The choice, as always, is yours.